Hey, and welcome to the 5-Minute Podcast Review for Friday, November 18, 2016. Jumping right into it, and the first podcast is Yo, Is This Racist?, where each episode kicks off with a listener voicemail question about if something is or isn't racist. Then host Andrew T and a weekly guest, who's usually a comedian, pull the question apart and try and come up with an answer. What makes this really entertaining is that the questions and the discussions that follow aren't straitjacketed by trying to be politically correct. So I'm just going to play you a few of the setup questions that I've pulled from random episodes.
Yo, is it racist for white people to have dreadlocks?
Hey, Andrew and guest. So I'm a black man. I date, including online dating. And one question that I ask people is, what's your ethnicity? And normally, I think it's viewed as a thoughtful question. People say, oh, I'm this, that, it's interesting. But this one woman, and she was, I think she identified as half white, half black. I think that just makes you black. And for some reason, she was really offended by this question and didn't want to speak to me anymore. And I was wondering, is my question racist?
Hi, so I know that mispronouncing folks' names is a really serious microaggression. So I guess my question is, for an English speaker, if they are addressing someone from a different language, let's say like a Spanish speaker's name, when pronouncing that name, should they try their best to sort of like imitate the Spanish language using their accent to try to like create those sort of syllables or sounds that aren't in the English language? Or is that racist and they should just like say it the best they can, but even though that will be more whitewashed?
Hi, Andrew and guest. There's this Instagram makeup star who a few months back did makeup to make himself look like Snoop Dogg, which is kind of weird considering he's Asian. I think he's Filipino. Is that racist? Thanks.
There you go. If you want to hear the answers, or at least the discussions that followed those and plenty more questions, check out Yo, Is This Racist? Right now, there's over 900 episodes available, and you can see each week's question in the episode title, so it's easy to pick off and download just the questions that catch your interest. Podcast number 2 this week is the AusBackPacking Podcast, which is pretty much what it says on the packet, so I'll keep it short and sweet. If you're currently backpacking around Australia, or if you're planning to, definitely check out this podcast for great tips, tricks, and interviews with current backpackers, hostel staff, tour operators, and others in the Australian backpacking scene. That's the AusBackPacking Podcast. Podcast number 3 this week is WTF with Mark Maron, and I won't dwell too long on it either because I think most podcast listeners are well aware of it. WTF certainly got a massive PR boost with the Barack Obama episode, and definitely listen to that one if you haven't already. The format with Mark Maron literally interviewing guests in his suburban garage really does seem to get us closer to the person being interviewed, with an almost off-the-record sort of feel about it. And the overall calibre of guests, especially since the Obama interview, just keeps getting higher. I've just listened to the Ron Howard interview, which was terrific, especially if you want to hear Richie Cunningham say the word fuck a few times. And I'm looking forward to listening to the Roger Waters interview that's coming up on my playlist. That's WTF. On to podcast number 4, which is Found. So this is a new podcast series where each episode springs from the backstory behind random found items, like a note on a scrap of paper found on the ground, for instance. I'll play you a few seconds from the introductory episode just to give you more of a feel for what Found is all about.
You ever seen a scrap of paper blowing on the street? Stuck in the back of a desk at work? Maybe it's a love note, a to-do list, someone's journal. What if you let your curiosity take hold and picked it up?
I found that letter in the envelope just propped up in a flower bed.
That's what Found, our new podcast and app, is all about. I'm Davey Rothbart, the host of Found, and my whole life I've been fascinated by these kinds of notes and letters, plucked up off the floor of the city bus, in the prison yard, a bowling alley parking lot, each one a glimpse into the lives of strangers. Maybe they're written by someone looking for love or friendship, or someone describing big dreams. These finds are incredible, hilarious, soulful, mysterious, and they bring up all kinds of questions. And with the Found podcast and app, I'm going to look for answers wherever I can find them, talk to ordinary people with extraordinary tales to tell, and sometimes even track down the real people behind my favorite all-time finds to hear their stories.
So that's the Found podcast, and it's worth mentioning there's an app that goes with it that lets you photograph and upload your own finds so that the online Found community can all pile on and help discover the story behind your found item. And who knows, it may even end up as a podcast episode as well. On to the last podcast, and it's Coroner Talk. So this is an industry-specific podcast for coroners, morticians and others in the field of death investigation, and it covers subjects like postmortems, organ procurement, toxicology, the science of burned bodies, that sort of stuff, all pretty morbid. But what really got me is the opening sequence for each episode, which sounds more like the pumped-up intro to a morning breakfast radio team. Have a listen.
3617, respond to report of shots fired. The Coroner Talk podcast takes you behind the scenes with coroners, clinicians, and death investigators from around the world to provide training, news, and interviews from leading experts in the area of death investigation and scene management, bringing real stories and solid training together in one source. Now, here's your host, Darren Dake.
Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Coroner Talk, the only podcast.
There you go, that's Coroner Talk, and that's the 5-minute podcast review for this week. Links to all the podcasts mentioned should be on your screen, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.